Dr. Chris Jones is a seasoned educator from Massachusetts with an impressive 23 years in the field. For the past 14 years, he's been rocking it as a building administrator, and he currently wears the hats of president-elect at the Massachusetts State Administrator Association, and he is the principal at Whitman-Hanson Regional High School. Chris is also the author of a book called Seeing to Lead, and it's full of strategies for modern leaders to uplift and empower teachers and ultimately boost student success. And he's got a podcast by the same name where he shines the spotlight on teachers' voices, all in the name of bettering education as a whole. And I had the privilege of being a guest on Chris's podcast, Seeing to Lead, back in November. So you can find his podcast on any platform. It's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and that episode was released in November, and it's called Changing Professional Development to Professional Learning. Chris had so much good stuff to say, and I didn't want to limit him to the allotted amount of time that I normally do. So I actually let him go longer and broke this episode into 2 episodes. So you'll find the first part today and then the second part next week. So get ready to be inspired and informed by Dr. Chris Jones. Hi, friend. Are you ready to move into a leadership position? Do you have interests and ambitions that you want to pursue, but feel like you don't know how to take that next step? Maybe you want to start your own coaching or consulting agency. I'm Mel, and I help educators define their career path through correct mindset, knowing your options, and getting prepared for your career transition. I will show you how to level up your leadership skills, share your expertise in a new way, create impact on a larger scale, and put your leadership in motion. As an educator for over 20 years, I started to feel underused and like I had more to give. I knew when the time had come for me to leave the classroom and affect change on a larger level. Now, I'm ready to help you determine where your talents and skills mesh with your passions and interests. Put your leadership in motion and move into that next phase of your educational career journey. Let me help you define your career path by having the right mindset, knowing your options, and getting prepared for that next leadership position. So power up and put your leadership in motion. Welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm your host, Dr. Mel Vandevort, and I have a guest with me today. I have Christopher Jones with me today, and Christopher is really big in the educational arena. You may have heard of him. You may have heard his podcast. You may have seen his book. So welcome to the show, Christopher.
Oh, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, I was on your podcast not too long ago, and I think I called you out on the spot and told you that I think you needed to be on mine, and you were very willing, and I appreciate that. So thank you for being here.
No, that's perfect. I remember you calling me out. You were pretty clear on that. So it's great that we get to do this and kind of exchange ideas about school and leadership and how that affects ourselves and other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love collaborating because I learn as much as any of my guests do or any of my audience does, because I am all about the networking and connecting with other educational leaders, because there's some good stuff going on out there and you don't know what you don't know, and you learn so much from other people and collaborating. So tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do. Tell us about your podcast, your book. Let's just hear all of the things.
Sure. That's broad. You got a couple days that I can go through stuff.
Well, we don't have quite that long, but
yeah.
Let's get as much as we can in there.
There we go. So my name is Chris Jones. I'm the principal of a regional high school in Massachusetts. And I'm also the host of a podcast called Seeing to Lead, which is the name of a book that I recently put out. I think it was 2 years ago. But basically, Seeing to Lead, it's a play on SEE, and it's about supporting, engaging, and empowering those I serve. I have always fancied myself a teacher-centered principal, because the way I explain it, after I get the deep inhale whenever I'm sitting somewhere talking to other principals, and I say, hey, I'm teacher-centered, and they say, how can you even say that? You have to be student-centered. if you're going to be in a school? Well, the idea of stepping away from students to the point of the principal's office, the best way I can affect students is by leveraging the teachers in the building. So if I'm supporting, engaging, and empowering my teachers to the point where they're passionate about what they do, where they rediscover their why or their passion, and they're on board with the vision of what we're trying to accomplish, so that Sunday nights, they don't have the Sunday scaries, so to speak. I'm not expecting them to sit there and throw a party Sunday night because they're so excited about coming into work the next day. I'm not expecting cartwheels on the way into the building, but if they're coming into work with the idea that, yes, this is what I do and I like doing this, they're not concerned about it. There's not increased anxiety on the weekend because they're supported and they're engaged in their work. There's no way that students don't benefit to such a degree that it's higher than anything I could ever do on my own, no matter how many times I tried to hold student meetings or how many students I met with, because teachers are where the rubber meets the road. They're where it's at every day in the classroom. And so I try to build a culture around that, and I'm continuously improving what I do so that I can do that more effectively. I do that by focusing on the culture. I do that by focusing on teachers' why they got in the profession, because we were all starry-eyed at one point in our lives where we said, yeah, I'm going to do this. And we're not human if we haven't gone through times where it gets mundane, or we get burnt out, or we struggle coming in because of whatever reason. I like to think of it as we've lost connection with our original why. So my book is about how leaders can do that, how they can support teachers, how they can engage teachers, and how they can empower teachers. And the podcast is much the same. It has different guests on, like yourself, and ranges really in topic as long as it's tied back to, because I want it to be relevant to everybody. So as long as it ties back to the idea of seeing those you serve, seeing, standing for, supporting, engaging, empowering. In fact, I had students on my podcast as well, because I thought it was important to have students say what makes them feel supported, engaged, and empowered in classrooms so that teachers could benefit from it as well. So along those two lines, or those two items, I'm a coach. I coach new administrators, and I'm also the president-elect of our State Administrators Association.
Oh,
And
wow.
so
I did not know that. Congratulations.
Thanks. So starting next July, I will take the office of president, and we'll go from there.
And where are you located?
Massachusetts.
Okay.
I just continually work to do things like that. And I guess one of the things that I was surprised by and taken aback by, but it really kind of just gave me the impression that what I was doing was working. As last year, I think it was last year or maybe the year before, I can't remember the exact year on it, but I was MASCA, the Massachusetts School Counselors Association. Their state association awarded me the Administrator of the Year. And to think that counselors see me in that light, to where we are achieving our academic goals, we're moving the school forward, but we're doing it in a way that pays attention to students' social, emotional needs and their mental health.
Right.
So, that's pretty much it in a nutshell, without getting back too much into my why. And why I got into education in the first place. I really feel like on a daily basis, I'm fulfilling that moving forward. And that's what keeps me fresh and keeps me busy going into different things.
Well, you definitely have a lot on your plate. That's for sure. I kind of feel like I agree with you on that teacher-centered leader. I'm not a principal right now. I have been in the past, but I think once you leave the classroom, your focus does shift a little bit, and you are more adult-centered in what you do than student-centered. Or maybe you can say student-centered. Your students are just older. But I kind of feel like I understand exactly where you're coming from, or where you're going with that, especially.
You know what really sent that home for me is I'm big on communication. I'm a big believer, and you have to tell people what you're going to tell them. You have to tell them what you want to tell them, and then you have to tell them what you told them.
Oh, I learned that in FBLA when I was in high school.
There you go. And so I'm always looking for better ways to communicate. And a few years back, before I was at this school, it was at my other school, We were turning over to a Google school. And so my main method of communication with my faculty, besides my newsletter, my weekly newsletter, was through Google Classroom. And
Mm-hmm.
so when you talk about, you never really leave the classroom, you just change who's in it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my my classroom became my staff. And when it took that physical piece for me to wrap, sometimes a little slower. It took me that physical piece or action to wrap my head around the idea that, yeah, the staff is like your class.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to continually teach your staff. You have to continually empower your staff and help them get better each day, even if it's by incremental steps. And you're going to have the staff members that sometimes upset you, just like you have the students in your classroom. You're going to have the staff that try to do every single thing right. But essentially, you need to get your staff on board in a culture where everybody feels as if they belong and that they're part of that community so that you're all rowing in the same direction, so to speak.
So what does that look like in your building? How do you get your staff on board? How do you make everybody feel like they're part of the whole building and not just their siloed little classroom? I know sometimes when I was in the classroom, I felt siloed. I lived in my own little world and I didn't always know what was going on everywhere else. And, I didn't always have administration who was good about making me feel like I was part of the group
Mm.
rather than just my own little world in the classroom.
So there are a couple things. There are some small steps, and they can get bigger, and then to larger steps. One of the small things I do, and it's so easy, it's so low hanging fruit that anybody can do it. Every faculty meeting I start off with, I mean, first of all, I have a different type of faculty meeting because I don't believe in it. I truly practice if it can be emailed, it doesn't belong in a faculty meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So my faculty meetings, I start off every faculty meeting with gratitude. And I let teachers know, I call them out how grateful I am for things they've done. So I give
Mm-hmm.
shout outs. And then I open it up. I don't just do that myself. I open it up and faculty gives shout outs to other faculty members. And it's funny to watch that grow because when I first did that, they were looking around like, oh, okay. And there was like one, well, they brought me a cup of coffee the other day. And it's anything from simple to that to I've seen them work with students in a way that is A, B, C, D, E.
Mm-hmm.
And what that does is it builds bonds between the staff because the staff doesn't always know what every other staff member does or see what they do.
Exactly.
And it helps get rid of rumors. It helps dispel myths about, oh, that person is such and such, or oh, that person is this, because now they see them in a different light because of that. And here's more about communication, that spread of information piece. Because with a lack of information, you create a void, and that void gets filled by something that is
Yep.
usually not true and is usually negative. And so it builds that mesh, so to speak, between the faculty. So there's that, something simple to make them feel part of it. Now, when you dial it all the way up to something larger, in some of my faculty meetings, we ran a couple of faculty meetings where we did some work on our why, and we talked about our why. And one of the biggest activities we did was I had everybody sit there, and I shared first because the leader always has to go first,
Right.
what my why was and why I got into education. I asked everybody to just sit and think about what their why was, why they originally got into education. And so after they did that, I had them get in groups and share with their group what their why was and come up with some common themes. And then we shared out the common themes that each of the groups came up with. So now everybody's heard everybody's why. They kind of get where they are.
Mm-hmm.
And then they look at where their commonalities are and where some new ideas or new insights to people are that they work with every day, that they pass in the hallways. And then we shared out and then we got together and broke back up into groups and did some more work. But eventually what we did is we took those themes and we put them down into some core concepts. And then once we did that, we took those core concepts and in the groups, we had them create a story that exemplified their why because people learn best through stories.
Mm-hmm.
They remember through stories. So we had them take all of these whys that were then into themes that were then pushed down into core concepts and then make a story that illustrates that core concept. And we came out with about 4 different stories that they told. And as they told it, it was interesting to sit back and watch, because as they told it, you could see different parts where the people in their group would nod or they'd smile because it had to do with something they had said. And they
Mm-hmm.
could see part of themselves in that story. And that's how you get teachers feeling supported and engaged in the school's vision, because they can see individual parts of themselves and how they matter and how they attach to
Mm-hmm.
the overall vision. Because too often it's cold, it's large, it's all encompassing. We love our edu speak, and we try to
Mm-hmm.
get all those words in. It
Yep.
doesn't mean anything. And
Right.
people can't see themselves in it. And if they can, because of that one piece off of an exercise that just takes some time and commitment, they're that much more engaged. They see why they're coming to work every day. They understand why they need to work a little harder in this area to make sure that that story, that narrative that they've created and that they're part of, continues.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I love how you framed that up too. And them working together, that just builds so much of a team mentality when they're doing that
Right.
kind of stuff together. And, sometimes we do these things because we don't want everybody to know what we're thinking, or we want to keep our stuff, kind of separate because it may be embarrassing, or we feel like it's embarrassing, or we're too vulnerable or whatever. But when you become vulnerable and you open up and you share like that, then you start to see those common themes that you were talking about. And you see, oh yeah, they think just like I do, or this person thinks like I do. And I didn't think they did, but their
Yeah.
story is really touching me in a way that they didn't as a person in another classroom.
It's, and it's funny. This just came to me as you were talking, and you said that they see there are other people there. We have an Active Minds charter, which I don't know if your listeners know what that is, or all your listeners know. It's a student-led mental health charter, and it's part of a national organization. And they
I've
have
actually not heard of
sweatshirts.
that either, so I'm going to write that down so I can remember.
It's fantastic. It's about bringing awareness to mental health and destigmatizing the idea of people need help. And um, they have shirts and sweatshirts they sell. We do mental health games during our sports seasons where everybody wears green, the color for mental health. And their sweatshirts, they're pretty cool logos. I wish I had one on right now. But it says on the shirt, "You are not alone,"
Mm-hmm.
because the message is that you're not alone. And, we never are alone. And unfortunately,
Right.
there are times where we feel alone because we haven't been given the opportunity, that door hasn't been opened to see just how connected we are to other people.
Mm-hmm.
Now, maybe 1 out of 20 people that we're connected to, but there's that one person. And then we start to build on that sense of belonging. So the
Yes.
idea of "we are never alone" is just such a powerful phrase. And you made me think of it when you talked about how people go back and forth and see each other.
And I love that. And I sometimes think that we, as educators, when we're in a district, we are always trying to help the kids in this area, but we kind of forget about the adults sometimes. And we kind of,
Mm.
we push our teachers and our other educators to get things done and make sure the instruction is sound and do this and do that, but we kind of forget sometimes. I think it's starting to come around now and be much more prevalent, but we forget that our teachers have things, they have families, they have things they're dealing with, and they have students that they don't mesh with, or they have students that they love that break their hearts, and things like that. And we need to humanize each other in that arena a lot more.
And sometimes we miss that because, right, we come to work and then we go home and we see the people at work and they're our
Mhm.
work friends. Somebody said to me, we were meeting and it was in the middle of the pandemic, maybe closer to the end of the pandemic, where just everything was so stressful. And there was such stress, not just at work, but at home, that leakage started to occur with people.
Mhm.
And one of the individuals that I was in a meeting with said to me, said, "I'm really finding out who people are in the building."
Mhm.
Because you could no longer just come into work and say, "Oh, I know how to teach this and I can just go through this no problem," because maybe your parent had COVID. Maybe your kid was struggling mentally because they were cooped up too long and they didn't have an outlet. But all those stressors started to build up where you couldn't just put it away. How many
Mhm.
times do we think that our coworkers have an argument with their spouse, or there's been another problem with their kid in the morning before they come to work, but they still come to work and boy, they put that face on and they teach.
Mm-hmm.
That became incredibly hard to do with all the other stressors during the pandemic. And people really started to realize that we're all human. And so we're all struggling with our own thing at one point or another.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked a little bit before. You had mentioned that you were doing some new things in your building and you were creating a new schedule and you were talking about visions of a graduate. So give us a little bit of information about that.
Sure. And that, that has to do with the culture piece that you were talking about as well. Our vision of the graduate, and this is what took people some time to wrap their head around. When you create a vision of the graduate, the mission, the vision thing, you're stating what you want your graduate to be or know and be able to do, for more technical terms, when they leave your building. That's very difficult just to come up with a phrase and say, yeah, this is it. It's even more difficult to actually do and measure so that you can improve on it. Not so you can report out on it to anybody, but so you can improve on it so your students can benefit better from it. And so our vision of the graduate took multiple iterations. When I tell you, it probably would have taken 2 years, but instead it took us about 3.5 because we got interrupted by measuring desks to make sure they were 6 feet apart during the pandemic. So we kind of stepped away from that and we got back into that work, picked up where we left off. And it was a series of iterations, wordsmithing, and throwing out all the jargon and the stuff that a lot of times goes into visions. And what we did was when we came up with that phrase, we then had to decide how we were going to measure that and that make sure it drove all of our decision making. And so we sent it back to the faculty sent it back to us, we sent it back to the faculty. When I say we, I'm talking about my leadership team. And we came up with something that everybody afterwards was sitting around, and we were a little tired afterwards. And most of us said, this is like the best process. I really feel like, yeah, this is our vision. And so then came the next part, how we make that drive all our other decisions.
So was this district-wide or is this just your building?
Just my building.
Okay. And what grade level are you principal over?
9 to 12.
Okay. So high school. Yeah.
Yep. And so,
which makes me excited because you were doing the work that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
That connecting work, that networking with each other and collaborating with high school teachers, because sometimes we think, oh, we put this like high school teachers in a box, I think. And we say, they're not going to do that because that's elementary teachers who do that kind of thing. No, It's not. Teachers are teachers. It doesn't matter if they're high school or elementary. They want to connect with people.
Already so much good information, but I'm going to stop there for today. And I want you to join me back here next week, same time, same place for the second half of my conversation with Dr. Chris Jones.